Actually, it's great that you asked that and that was also a class with my students here in Regensburg. Anthropologists came very late to study climate change because they were aware. I mean, they were afraid that exactly this. We study, small places, although, as we know, small places could mean big issues.
Yeah.
But do we have the tools to study climate change?
Einmal.
Balkans Calling. Voices from the region.
Today I'm talking to Stefan Dorondel, who is our second Seafield visiting professor here in Regensburg for the winter term 23-24. You've been with us now for 2-3 months already, yeah?
3 months.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very happy that he's here because he is teaching on topics that I think are extremely relevant nowadays, and that's environmental history and anthropology. So you're doing a lecture here on this topic, which has actually attracted quite a lot of attention. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about this in a second. And you're also giving an advanced seminar on the anthropology and history of infrastructure. So, I would like also to hear a little bit more on that. Stefan is a researcher at the Institute of Anthropology at the Romanian Academy, but you also have a position at the Institute for Southeast European Studies.
That's correct.
In Bucharest at the Romanian Academy. And so today we're going to have a conversation about your work and, let's say, your career. And I would like to start asking you. I mean, I've had a look a little bit at your biography, your CV. So what is quite interesting is I think you have a very interdisciplinary profile. So you have done a PhD in history in 2004 in Sibiu. Immediately after that, almost, you did another PhD in agricultural economics, which you did at Humboldt University in Berlin.
Yeah.
And still you would call yourself an anthropologist. So, can you tell us a little bit more about how about this trajectory and how you came actually to study sort of environmental issues particularly?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ger, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. About the students, I think I think this class on environmental history and anthropology is quite well received. Students come, they ask questions, they are interested. So I'm actually very glad that I suggested this class for my 2 PhDs, which for a Western year sounds very peculiar. I have to say that my ambition and my curiosity was to see if I can make a PhD in a Western institution, first of all, and second, if I can do it in a different language than my own language, which is of course Romanian. And for the second PhD, which was officially in agriculture, economics, and social sciences, it was called Institut für Wirtschaft und Sozialwissenschaften des Landbaus. So a sort of social sciences approaches to agriculture and to agricultural world. And this is how I actually started to be interested in environmental issues, because when I applied for that position as a PhD student, I was primarily interested in property rights, how an anthropologist can study property rights. I was interested in the mechanism of restitution of land and forest in post-socialist Romania. But then I started to work with Thomas Sicor, who was my mentor at that time, my supervisor, mentor the same time at Humboldt University, and he was interested in environmental issues, and step by step I started myself to be interested in these issues. And although and I mentioned that in the book from 2016, Disrupted Landscapes, which is basically my second PhD turned into a book. When I arrived in the field, I was interested following, the big names in the anthropology of land restitution, like Chris Hahn and Verderi and Cristian Giordano and all other Western anthropologists. So I was interested in that. So pretty much on market, economic, political aspects of land, kind of completely ignoring the environmental issues. And then
so you moved actually from let's say property issues, which was almost like a classical topic in the Chris Hahn school in Halle, the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology. You moved in sort of almost like organically into dealing with environmental issues because it was disregarded or ignored.
It was completely disregarded also by this big anthropologist, and in a paper I published now 2 years ago in Critique of Anthropology, I was quite critical of these anthropologists because they took the land, what I was doing at the time as well, I have to be clear on that. So they took the land as a political and economic and identity issue, but disregarding totally the environmental aspects. And to come back to what I wanted to say, I was in the field interviewing people, and I was trying to move them towards, market and land values, and all these things you actually read in every anthropological paper and book, and they kind of were talking to me about the fact that they keep seeds from one year for another one, and they received orchards back from the collective farm, which was dismantled after 1990s. They don't have money to do what the collective farm did, to spread all sorts of substances on trees, and very often they had to do all kind of things, agricultural practices, which turned the good production of certain plum trees, for instance, into a poorer production. But their interest was not to sell plums on the market. Very difficult. It involves a lot of logistics. They just wanted to make Tsuika, plum brandy, out of it. Actually, I have in that book a sort of social look at Tsuika.
In the Disrupted Landscapes book.
Yes.
Well, why? Tsuika, I know. I've been in Romania a lot. It's very important.
Yeah, it is.
For social interaction.
It is.
It's kind of, the lubricant of lots of social events, I think. But why have you called your book Disrupted Landscapes? I mean, what is the idea behind this?
I think after 1990s, if you look comparatively what I did before 1989 and after, so during collectivization and after decollectivization, obviously you see two very different landscapes. Forests were cut, clear cut very often, legally or illegally, and I use illegally for the lack of a better term, because it's not my place to say.
We're talking now the post-socialist period.
Yeah, post-socialist period. In post-socialist period, forest was completely cut. The way they do agriculture completely changed as opposed to before 1989. Imagine overnight they became not only the owners, but they were those who made decisions. How, what, when to seed in order to harvest in autumn. Before
we're talking here about a relatively small community that you did your fieldwork in.
Yes,
At the foot of the Carpathian Mountains.
Exactly, in a hilly region.
Yeah.
In a hilly region. So agriculture was not the only important thing, was actually not that important. Orchards were very important, also animal husbandry, and of course forest, for those who actually owned some forest or got back some forest after 1989. So if you look at 1989 and post 1989, you see two very different landscapes, because the agricultural practices were different, because the political system completely changed, dramatically changed, because a local community of Rudari, they were used as a scapegoat by the political elite of the village in order to get access to forest resources, basically to cut forest.
Rudari being a particular group of Roma, I think.
Yes, I mean, the Romanian state considers them Roma. Some of scientists consider them Roma as well, but themselves they don't consider Roma. They just they say, if I don't speak, I don't dress, I don't behave like a Roma, why should I be called a Roma? This is with the ethnic identity is totally another discussion. It's also very passionate, but sticking to the disrupted landscapes, obviously after 1989 there was a huge disruption in landscapes, and that on a very short period of time. Think that I carried fieldwork in 2004, 2005, and then again when I was at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle as a postdoc, 2009, 2010. So there were only like 14, 15 years after 1990s. So after the restitution of land and forest started, and obviously already environmental issues which were clearly manifesting before 1989 became very clear and very powerful after 1989. And it was the merit of Thomas Sikor that he kind of slowly turned me into this direction. And then when I was a New Europe College fellow, I was sent in Bucharest. It's an Institute for Advanced Studies, the first one in Romania, and probably one of the most important in Southeast Europe. So as part of this fellowship, I had money to go somewhere where I wanted, and I chose Berkeley because our group at Humboldt used to work with several professors from Berkeley, and I particularly worked with Jeff Rom and Nancy Peluso, big names in political ecology. And this is when I actually turned kind of radically towards environmental issues.
That was around 2010 or so.
2009.
Yeah.
In 2009.
Yeah.
And because for my PhD dissertation in Berlin, the big topic was agrarian differentiation, which is an important topic, but it's pretty much political economy, and it's a bunch of scholars. It's a very narrow approach, and I actually didn't want that, to be honest. And
you spent also some time in Yale with James Scott, and of course we have been talking before this interview quite a bit about all sorts of things, but I've always been under the impression that James Scott has been a real influence on you too.
Oh yes, yes, in every possible way. I mean, yes, I was again, as a member of this group, I had money to go somewhere for half a year, and I chose Yale, and I had to be accepted basically even without funds. But it's very agrarian studies program at Yale. It's very restrictive and very competitive, so I had to apply as any other applicant. I was accepted for half a year, and then I started to work with James Scott, who became basically my second supervisor, the external supervisor at Humboldt University. And of course I was very influenced by his work and by his way of being in the world. He's really a gentleman and is a wonderful cook, by the way. And we started
And a very famous, what is he? Anthropologist, historian, political scientist? Or
a bit of all of this, which I have to say that this is my model. So a strict specialization on one topic and stick with that all your life, it doesn't fit me. So,
but he made quite a big impact, I think, also with his latest or one of his later books, that Against the Grain, I think it's called.
Yeah. I mean, this one was so after a very long period of time when there was no big narrative on prehistory. He, who is a political scientist, actually, he was trained as a political scientist. Then he trained himself as an anthropologist himself. So he was interested as a political economist, political scientist, but also as an anthropologist. The beginning of elite, of state, of how actually this happened, and that happened more or less in the Neolithic, beginning of the Neolithic period.
So the advent of agriculture, state building, etc.
Exactly. Scott was very influential for me, and one of the first things he taught me, and it stays with me, and I try to pass over whenever I can to young students I'm working with. He said, Stefan, do not read only your own tribe, because if you want a new idea, if you want to have a way of thinking out of the box, you need to read things which apparently may be very different to what you actually read. But these kind of readings will have an impact on you, and will open up your mind towards new directions, new avenues, new horizons.
So you can only be innovative if you think out of the box and read things that have perhaps apparently not much to do with your topic. Or
exactly. And I have to say that I read quite a lot. And if you ask me the last 2 years, for instance, some of the best books I read are not actually coming from anthropology or written by anthropologists. There are books coming from, for instance, Michael Pollan, The Botany of Desire, which is a great book and which teaches us how to look from the perspective of non-human, so from a flower perspective, which is great. We said, well, we domesticated this and that. He, as a gardener, but also as an essayist and writer, he said, well, let me look from the flower's perspective.
So turn around the game.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very difficult. And actually, I had the last class I had was on multi-species ethnography and modern human, and I think I made a big impact because none of them tried so far to switch the gaze.
Yeah.
So of course we always look from our perspective as humans, very often as Europeans, white people, Christians, etc. But then you ask them, try the other side and see how you would see the world. It's not easy, but it's fascinating, and it's something we have to do because we live in the Anthropocene. So,
do you think that's a useful concept, the Anthropocene? I'm just about to finish a book written by a German anthropologist, Christoph Antweiler, on the Anthropocene, where I've actually noticed that there's quite a bit of criticism, perhaps also on this concept. Actually, it's also lack of clarity. What do we actually mean by that? Yeah, and when did it start? And where do we actually talk about the Anthropocene? Is it something that started, in this Neolithic period when people started actually to do agriculture already?
What James Scott says, but other people say, well, no, it's actually 18th century, and it started with industrialization and the use of fossil fuel, and yet some others, like John McNeill, for instance, is one of the most important environmental historians today in the United States. He says, no, it may start 18th century, but there is the big acceleration, the great acceleration after 1945. So
which is Thomas Ericsson's position also, with this overheating thesis.
Yeah. So coming back to Anthropocene, of course, as a general term, it says human became a geological force. So we drove so many bad things to this planet, to the biosphere. But that is kind of inaccurate if you look closer, because not all humans did the same thing. Of course, capitalism and colonialism did a great job, let's put it that way, in destroying this planet. So when you say humans, you take out from the equation the
political economy side of
exactly
things. Yeah.
exactly, which we can't do that.
Yeah.
And there were actually James Moore, for instance, suggested the word capitalocene instead of Anthropocene, because he wanted to make clear that capitalism was the one which actually started to drive these changes. Some other people blame plantation as a sort of epitome of colonialism and what the colonialism did in outside Europe and then within Europe itself.
Yeah.
But
can I ask? Yeah,
I just want to say that I stick with Anthropocene because, and here I quote another hero of mine, Anna Tsing. I love her work, and I've never met her personally, but I love her work. And Anna Tsing says, well, once we can use Anthropocene acknowledging all this and saying not all humans, but some of them, and in some periods of time, particular periods of time. But Anthropocene also kind of helps us as a concept to realize that this is a planetary thing, right? So as a planetary thing, it's important, every single human being on this planet, to know that we are on the brink of huge problems, and we are contributing to extinction of so many species, which at the end will lead to the extinction of our own species. That's quite clear. Yeah. We cannot be in this world but in close entanglements with other beings, other species. We cannot, to cite Donna Haraway, we can't say living. We are living with someone, and this someone is more than human, other species, and we have to be very clear on that. And that's why I insisted on all these authors and all these things in this class I'm teaching here.
Yeah.
And
where do you see the role of anthropology as a discipline with its very specific methods? Let's say, very local, very much here and now. Yeah. Is there anything that anthropology can contribute in making us, let's say, conscious of these large-scale global processes that have actually taken already a long time to emerge? If you talk about the Anthropocene as something that might have started really in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, are we, as anthropologists, kind of I don't know, suited to? I mean, are we the right people to?
Do we have the tools? You mean
do we have the tools?
To... Yeah. Actually, it's great that you asked that, because, and that was also a class with my students here in Regensburg. Anthropologists came very late to study climate change because they were aware. I mean, they were afraid that exactly this. We study, small places, although, as we know, small places could mean big issues.
Yeah.
But do we have the tools to study climate change? And actually, we do have. First of all, we have a long tradition in studying human and nature relationship. Second, it's true that climate change manifests globally. But if we acknowledge the activity of humans as drivers of climate change, then this activity cannot be other than local. A forest is cut somewhere in Amazonia, right, or in the Balkans, which means you have to go there to look who is responsible for that, which are the political mechanisms, which are the social and economic mechanisms, and then you actually are much better equipped to study these kind of things which have
these consequences, let's say.
Have global consequences, but they happen locally.
Yeah.
So suddenly, and now we know that we are in a good position to study climate change. Anthropocene is probably every second paper or so in anthropology deals with Anthropocene, which is good, I think. So we came late, but we have excellent tools no one else has. Ethnography, participant observation, all this, you can say a lot of things about this mechanism of deforestation, of pollution, of rivers, of consequences of damming rivers and destroying basically the entire biodiversity, to turn rivers into what Richard White called in 1995 what he called it, the organic machine, rivers as an organic machine. So they transform, they are kind of cyborg because they are hyper technologized and infrastructured. So we have these tools. We are quite well equipped to do that, in fact.
Does it make sense for you as an environmental anthropologist or historian to talk about areas or area studies? I mean, does it make sense at all to, if we, I mean, you work, research and work at the Institute for Southeast European Studies, is this a viable concept for you to talk about these things in an area construct like Southeastern Europe?
Well, first of all, I should say that whenever I have to present myself, I say environmental historian / environmental anthropologist, because I also consider myself a historian and an anthropologist as well. Coming back to your question, clearly it would be very difficult to talk about Anthropocene in Southeast Europe, let alone to say about a country. What we can do and we should do for Southeast Europe, because, and this is another huge problem, there is a very small interest for environmental issues in Eastern Europe. It's incredible, and maybe we can say a few words after that on this topic. I think it doesn't make sense, area studies, if you look at the consequences. But then
of climate change,
pollution. But then you have to go down at the roots of these manifestations, and then you have to go in a certain area, in a certain village. And Southeast Europe, particularly, is the environmental destruction in Southeast Europe is appalling, because, and that's not something it was incredibly well studied, the socialist politics with forced industrialization and industrial agriculture, so on and so forth. So the emphasis on development on the expense of nature, basically nature was one of the enemies, and we know from Lenin and from Stalin that humans must master and subdue, control the nature. So it was the very core. It's in the very core idea of socialist, the way Lenin and other big names in socialist and communist ideology. So clearly, it was huge distractions. There were huge distractions in Eastern Europe. On top of that, you have neoliberal transformations, which were even more disruptive than the socialist one. And now we have entire mountains which are completely denuded of forest. You have Danube Delta, which is a pool for biodiversity, the most important one probably in Europe, and yet there are so many damaging things happening there because of the politics, corruption, poverty. We have to mention that poverty of people always drive this kind of problems, so area studies make sense as long as we take topics and theories from the Western scholars. Then we have to adapt to our own needs, and actually this is what I do, hoping that at a certain moment I will come up with, I don't know, maybe my own theory, but it's not necessarily that.
But you're one of the few who's doing this actually in Southeastern Europe, had this kind of research on environmental issues.
Unfortunately, and there are not many Westerners doing that. I suspect here we can evoke Maria Todorova, and she said, well, Eastern Europe is a strange place, is a place in between, because we don't have necessarily a colonial past. We were not, we means Southeast Europe or Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe is not part of the sort of the center of civilizational facts, and then it's somehow in between, and many scholars don't know what to do with that. So because you cannot use indiscriminately colonial and post-colonial theories, because simply doesn't work. You can't talk about indigenous population. There's no indigenous population here at all. Some people may claim that, for instance, non-indigenous population would be I don't know, Roma. But they were brought here in the 13th, in the Balkans in the 12th, 13th century. So for God's sake, it's difficult to call them non-indigenous. Then, so a lot of concepts and theories which work well for extra-European areas do not work here.
Don't apply.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in this matter, I think area studies, especially Southeast Europe or Eastern Europe, as an area studies, should strive to make a difference. Try to come up with our own concepts, theories, which sometimes may even go against the theories like colonialism and post-colonialism, but it's even better. But I think that would be an important point when on which those who claim themselves they do area studies should think about.
But it's actually a plea also to perhaps to think locally in certain ways, to start thinking from the region, and perhaps from there you may develop a different approach to, let's say, theories or models that have been developed elsewhere and fit there, but not in Southeastern Europe, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we actually tried to do, Stefan Shaban and I, in our latest edited volume, A New Ecological Order, which was quite well received, I should say, already 5 or 6.
When did that appear, the book?
In 22.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh
so it's a very recent edited volume that came out and has already attracted quite a bit of attention. Huh?
Yes, indeed. And this is what actually we try to do. So it's not like Eastern Europe just received wisdom from the West and they just swallow it in the East. No, there was a meeting between two ideas of nature about or ideas of development, and meeting between different experts, even technologies, and we were interested in this kind of meeting point to see what was taken from the Western world, what was the contribution of Eastern
scholarship.
Yeah. And so from this point of view, we made a sort of first step. But there is much more to be done. I think.
Can we, at the end of our conversation, perhaps talk a little bit, because you've also been teaching a course on infrastructure. So why is infrastructure important in all of this?
We live in a world of infrastructure. Basically, if you look where we are right now, that would not be possible without infrastructure, without electricity, which is part of the infrastructure. there's building and so on and so forth. So infrastructure is not only about machines and technology and iron and tin. No, it's pretty much about politics. This is what I try to teach in this class, anthropology of infrastructure. It's pretty much about ideas, about discourses, about foremost politics.
How these ideas and concepts get implemented through, let's say, interventions in the material, physical world. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, you have so many examples. If you visited me on my field site, and you noticed when we went in this very poor part of the village with rural population, and you saw them. You saw those wires and you asked, what is that? Well, actually, they don't have, for many reasons, they don't have access to a vital infrastructure, which is electricity, right? We don't see this one, but we know actually it is there. Usually people working on infrastructure say we don't pay attention to infrastructure. Most of the time is invisible. Exactly. We only realize that is there when it doesn't work, when there's a problem. When you don't have internet, you suddenly freak out and you realize that actually internet is an infrastructure, an invisible and immaterial, but still an infrastructure. So coming back to these poor people, they cannot have access to a vital infrastructure, first of all, because some of them don't even have documents for the house or the land they occupied, so they are kind of squatters. And sometimes they don't have money to pay, so they are disconnected. And this is a matter of deep political arrangements and, of course, economic one. So when you talk about infrastructure, you immediately talk about politics, about economics, about social injustice very often. So there are so many.
Many issues attached actually to infrastructure and access to it or non-access to it.
Exactly. That's why I think in the social theory today, infrastructure plays a kind of a vital role. It's a lens we put and we look at society, and we have a very different view. Yeah. Because without that, we risk to misunderstand big time what happened in the world.
We kind of take it for granted,
exactly,
and that's why we're not looking at it.
Exactly. We're taking for granted. It's there, and it's kind of wire networks, pipes. That's roads, and that's infrastructure. But very often, for many populations, infrastructure is the only reason to hope. So if this road will be built, then we have access to development or whatever. So infrastructure is also it's one way to look at the hopes of entire communities, their dreams for a better world. So without ruling out infrastructure would completely miss these kind of ideas, these kind of dreams, this kind of projection for future for populations which are actually very poor and
I think that's a nice point to end this conversation with. So thank you very much, Stefan, for a very interesting conversation on the topics that you deal with. And I hope very much to see you back in Regensburg, to report about your research and that you're going to do in the future.
Well, I'm still here for another month, but I can't wait to come back as well. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our podcast recommendation this month: Why is defending forests so deadly? By BBC World series The Climate Question.